Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Saturday, March 1st. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. We've got a special bonus episode for you today because this week we had a special visitor to the KVPR studios, NPR's Senior White House Correspondent Tamara Keith. Tamara actually grew up in Hanford, and she returned to the Valley this week to discuss her work at a free event KVPR hosted at Fresno City College. Tamara's visit could not have come at a better time, as just this week, the White House announced it would break with nearly 100 years of media tradition. Moving forward, the White House announced that they would start selecting the reporters in the White House press pool. That's a decision that has historically fallen to the White House Correspondents Association. The announcement has stunned journalists and created First Amendment concerns. Tamara was president of the association from 2022 to 2023. For context, we recorded this conversation the day after the announcement from the Trump administration. But to start off, I first asked Tamara to tell us about where her passion for journalism began.
Well, this is sort of fun, and it happened in the Great Central Valley when I was a kid. But I entered a writing competition. I think maybe we were all required to enter this writing competition to write about what you wanted to be when you grew up. And I wrote that I wanted to be a volcanologist. I wanted to study volcanoes.
Wow.
And I won. I was like one of the kids who won. And part of the prize was that Channel 47 would do a story about me. And so I got to come to Fresno from Hanford, where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And this reporter for Channel 47 did a story about me. And I was like, that job seems way cooler than studying volcanoes. And I actually, could see how I could get myself to that point. And I wasn't quite sure how I was going to become a volcanologist.
Yeah.
And so it was right then and right there.
Wow. So I also know you studied philosophy in college, so you must have such varied interests. It's a great job for someone with varied interests.
Well, exactly. Journalism, and especially covering the White House, although, yes, it's a political reporting job and you're covering just this one building, in reality, you're covering everything that the president touches, which means that on any given day, I'm covering the price of eggs or the availability of baby milk powder or Houthi rebels in Yemen. Yeah. It is such a wide range, the economy, foreign policy, just such a wide range of topics. I'm constantly learning. Mm-hmm. I am constantly having to get up to speed very quickly, seek out experts, find people who can make me smart, at least smart enough that I can then explain this policy or this issue that has real impact on real people's lives in a way that is digestible. And you have to understand it to explain it.
Yes, and I might be misremembering this, but I think I did an NPR informational session or something once, and I want to say it was Scott Detrow who spoke and said, my friend Tamara says, if you can't write a spot in a minute, you don't know what the spot's about. Am I remembering that correctly?
I believe that this legend has grown. But Scott Detrow, who's one of the hosts of All Things Considered, he, at one point I did tell him, you've got to be able to write a spot in 15 minutes or less. It needs to be done in 15 minutes. Don't spend all day on it. Just figure it out, get to the point, write it fast, and move on. And there are many days where I'm doing 3 or 4 news spots. That's the 45-second thing that you hear in the newscast at the top and the bottom of the hour. And often on completely different topics. But I love newscast spots. It is an art form. I love trying to figure out, can I fit 2 sound bites into this one tiny thing? Can I take this thing that was a feature on Morning Edition and do it in a 45-second version? And what I love about newscast is it is our show at NPR that reaches more people than anything else we do.
Right. And as you said, you're on such a dynamic beat. What is the best thing about being on the White House beat, and what is the hardest thing?
Oh, gosh. So I think that what I would say is that the best thing is that we are in this place of incredible privilege. It is remarkable to walk through those gates, no matter who the president of the United States is, go through the metal detector, scan the card, put in the PIN code, get wanded by the Secret Service. It is an incredible privilege to be there in that place of power on behalf of the American people. And it's an incredible responsibility, and I feel very lucky to get to do it. I'm in a presidential motorcade. I am on Air Force One. I am in the Oval Office or the Cabinet Room. Not for me. Like, Tamara Keith isn't there. But, the White House correspondent for National Public Radio is there. And so that is the best thing about it. I think one of the less great things is that, as a photographer who covers the White House once put it, you see everything and experience nothing.
Wow.
Because you're not there as you.
Wow.
You're in a van. You see everything flying by that window, but you're there to document. You're not there to experience.
So how much is your beat focused on covering the president specifically versus news coming out of the White House?
Well, I think that the president essentially touches every aspect of what comes out of the White House, and especially this current president who makes policy seemingly by just saying stuff. He's constantly making announcements. And, part of the struggle with this right now is he is saying so much so often about so many things. Where do you pick your spots? How do you know what is a real policy that is going to be implemented and what is musings?
Mm-hmm.
And, one of my many New Year's resolutions, many of which are not being followed, is to, as much as possible, report on what the president and the administration are doing and not just what they're saying.
Over your 10 years plus reporting in the White House, what would you say is one of your most memorable moments?
It all blurs together a little bit. But the surprise trip to Iraq that I was on with President Trump is one of those indelible memories. The trip to Israel with President Biden after the October 7th terrorist attack was extremely memorable. Getting called on for the first time by a president of the United States in a press conference is quite memorable. And I just went back and rewatched the video and, oh my God. Future me would like to tell past me to take my advice to keep your questions short and simple.
It's so hard to do, though.
It is, but I think it's important because I think that shorter, more concise, more direct questions are clarifying. They force the president, they make it clearer whether the president is answering the question.
That makes sense. To go back to your Valley roots real quickly, I'm curious if you feel your experience here shaped how you approach reporting now.
Oh, absolutely. I think that a lot of journalists in Washington that cover the White House or cover Congress, they got an internship right out of college and they have been covering politics for their entire careers. And I've covered politics off and on for a lot of my career, but a lot of it was more politics adjacent and focused on policy. And I think that my time in the Valley, both growing up in the Valley and then later reporting from the Valley, just gives me a completely different perspective. Because this is not part of the Beltway. This is very far outside of the Beltway, and I think that is important perspective.
Almost as far as you could get from the Beltway, really,
Yeah,
if you think about it.
We could go to Hawaii, but it's very far outside of the Beltway, and the issues that affect people in the Valley are very real. There are life and death issues. And, the effects of what happens in Washington is not remote. It's real and it's tangible. And having spent time with families whose drinking water is too contaminated to drink, or having spent time reporting on air quality problems, or, like all my many years covering the water wars in California was pretty helpful when the president of the United States says we're turning on the water.
Totally. And I think it's probably gratifying to listeners to hear that you have that experience and background, because there is that critique that the media is in a bubble, or there's some sort of division or schism between the coastal elites and the rural voices. And while I think we're actively trying to get away from that narrative, it's still nice to know there's people, like you say, telling these stories and reporting these facts. They are people at the end of the day. It's not just a big media name.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the great challenges is it's like, oh, the mainstream media, the corporate media, whatever the criticism is. It's like, I'm not the media. I am a person with life experiences that inform, and reporting experiences that inform my work. And I am always trying to do the best that I can do on any given day, but I'm also human.
100%. So how do you balance work and personal life, if that even is possible? I understand.
Listeners, you can't hear how much my eyes just rolled. Some days better than others.
Yeah.
Right? Like some days I have something important that I need to deal with my kids, and I say I need a half day. And some days I am like glued to my computer until 11 p.m. and then I'm on up first the next morning. And it's like, well, work-life balance wasn't great that day, but I did something I'm proud of.
100%. Do you have hobbies or interests that kind of motivate you, or outlets? Because this is it's demanding to be in national journalism. I would think it's particularly demanding to be in national journalism covering the White House in Washington, D.C.
So my hobbies are not like exciting, but I like to exercise.
Nice.
Which keeps me stable.
Totally.
Very important. So I like to run. I like to lift weights. I can't believe I'm even saying that. But I do now like to lift weights.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very helpful. I like to spend time with my kids. I like to bake. I occasionally try to keep a sourdough going.
Nice.
And then my other hobby is working to save my local paper in my little town, my little suburb that I live in. So, like, literally my hobby is journalism, but local journalism, because I think it is so incredibly important. I think the value of local journalism is just immense. And I think sometimes us, like, national journalists get all the credit, and we shouldn't.
Well, we appreciate hearing you say that. Do you also play softball?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
That is also a Sporty Spice thing. Yes, I play softball. I play on the Congressional Women's Softball Game. I play on the Bad News Babes. We play against female members of Congress, which funny thing. I have a story that's going to air on Morning Edition on Friday, and I interviewed a former member of Congress who I used to play softball against, and she was like a really good talker. And my editor was like, "How did you find her?" It was like, "Oh, well, I play softball against her."
Is that like a thing in D.C.? Because when I was an intern in D.C., I played softball on the mall, and there were a lot of teams there.
Yes, a mall softball, national mall softball is a very big thing, and national mall dodgeball and all of that. But the Congressional Women's Softball Game is a very specific thing, and it's a fundraiser for the Young Survival Coalition, which is a breast cancer charity. And it's just really cool because, like, the sisterhood of my softball teammates, we lift each other up, we help each other out. Like, that game has enhanced my life in ways I can't even begin to explain, including that game is why I have a regular gig talking about politics on the PBS NewsHour. And then on the other side, the other team, Republicans and Democrats who almost have nothing in common anymore and have very few venues to socialize or see each other as fellow humans, those members of Congress are on a team together. And we are their common foe, and we will take it because I think it is good for democracy.
That is amazing. Let's pivot back to work-related things real quick. I know we're in a pretty tense political climate right now. How does that affect your job? Because a lot has changed since you first started in this role in 2014. I mean, President Obama was in office. It's hard to even fathom how much has evolved in that time, but how much does sort of the national political mood affect how you do your work?
Yeah, I think that the word we're looking for here is whiplash. There have just been significant changes going back and forth between Democratic and Republican administrations, from Obama to Trump, from Trump to Biden, and back again. This is a particularly challenging moment for the White House press corps just in the last 24 hours. The White House announced that they were going to blow up nearly 100 years of tradition, which is the White House press corps choosing who is in the room. We create, for years, for like nearly 100 years, we have created the so-called pool, the small group of reporters that go into the Oval Office, go on Air Force One, reporters and photographers. And we have decided amongst ourselves, self-governance, who should be in the room. And the White House has decided, no, we want to decide who's going to be in the room. And we don't want certain outlets, like, for instance, the Associated Press, because their standards say that body of water between Florida and Mexico is the Gulf of Mexico, because it is an international body of water. Their standards also say that they should mention that President Trump has renamed it in the United States. But the White House has explicitly, and I think very clearly in violation of the First Amendment and rules that say there shouldn't be viewpoint discrimination, the White House has said, you're not getting back in the Oval Office, you're not getting back in the pool until you change what you write. And that is a head-on assault on journalistic independence. And it's really scary. And then in the last 24 hours, they've now announced, and we're going to control the print pool, and we're going to control the radio pool, and we're going to cut the number of wire services that are allowed in the room, and we're going to add pro-Trump outlets, which is functionally the White House and the president saying that they are going to pick their press corps. And that just goes against everything that has been the norm and is, called for in the United States Constitution.
Yeah, I think there is a fear that this is evolving into government-sanctioned media or controlling the narrative when outlets need to maintain their independence. It's worth noting even a Fox News correspondent has weighed in and said this isn't right. I don't agree. People across both sides of the political spectrum are concerned.
And do you know how much heat she took on Twitter for even weighing in, which is tough. And, I also put something out on social media saying that a free and independent press makes America stronger. And my husband called and was like, do we need to get a security system on the house? Have you looked at the mentions on that? And I was like, oh, no, I haven't.
Wow. You were the president of the White House Correspondents Association, who typically determines these pools and where reporters go and such. Has anyone in current leadership reached out to you? What have folks said? I would think you would be a resource in a time like this.
We have a flaming hot text chain going with a bunch of the former presidents. And we as a press corps are grappling with this. And I think that anyone who thinks that there's an easy answer here doesn't fully understand the complexities of this press corps.
And not to get too in the weeds here, but I am curious, when you say the White House press corps, you mentioned the different types of media. Are they all represented in one corps, or are there different corps per different types of media?
Well, we are one big press corps. That's basically just like everybody who potentially covers the White House. But then there are pools. This is in the weeds, but there's a radio pool, there's a TV pool, there are the wires, which each feed their different wire services. And then the print pool is like the centerpiece of the whole thing. The print pool is essentially a first draft on history. And the White House Correspondents Association, there are standards that are required in order to be a member of that pool. I will say there are pro-Trump media outlets in our pool. And there are outlets that are more to the left in our pool that we have created. And that that rotation of outlets that exists. There is a wide spectrum. Most are sort of mainstream down the middle, but there are partisan outlets, but they meet the standards. They agree to rigorous journalistic standards for the pool reports that they write. They are credentialed by Capitol Hill, which means that there's transparency about where their funding comes from. We take a lot of comers. We take almost all comers as long as they qualify. And they're willing to produce these rigorous pool reports, which truly are the first draft of history. And because the 600 people who are members of the White House Correspondents Association can't all be in that room at one time. So we're counting on the poolers. We're counting on the print pool especially. And, what the White House did last night is they said, oh, Huffington Post is up next in the rotation. We don't want the Huffington Post. We're going to offer it to another outlet. That outlet refused. So they offered it to another outlet who said yes.
So a lot internally to grapple with as well. And this is probably going to be a huge conversation moving forward in terms of the media's relationship with the Trump presidency.
Yeah, and I worry that this all seems inside baseball and that the American people don't know the difference or don't care and don't trust us anyway. And, the term legacy media comes up a lot. And, I think that as a country, we are as a world, globally, we're in a tough place in terms of the standing of the press.
Yeah. Well, moving forward, what are you keeping your eye on? What else is important to you in this administration? What are you thinking about covering? What can people expect?
Yeah, I think I am definitely still working to get my footing because things change every 15 seconds. And so I'm sort of picking my spots. The next story I'm working on is about the president's address to a joint session of Congress, which don't call it a State of the Union because the first one's not a State of the Union. But looking back at the one he gave in 2020, which was sort of it was like some combination of State of the Union, reality TV, game show, and WWE. And behind door number 2, there were surprises. It was, State of the Unions are overly long and boring. That one was not boring. And so I'm looking at what that one might tell us about what comes next.
That was my conversation with NPR Senior White House Correspondent Tamara Keith. And that's today's show. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back to our regular schedule on Monday. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.